Well, welcome to, I think we're up to our fourth keynote now, fifth, I'm not sure. Anyways, we're just plugging right along. I have a huge privilege today to introduce Dr. Vitomir Kovanović, sort of the formal role. He's a senior lecturer in learning analytics at the University of South Australia and Education Futures. His research, which has been going on for really about as long as the learning analytics field has existed, just looks at learning analytics systems to provide insight into student learning and to sort of guide pedagogical innovations. If you want to look at his CV, I'll drop a URL into his website once he actually gets started. He's been active in publication and learning analytics, as I mentioned, since the field itself roughly started. He was the program chair during the 10th International Conference on Learning Analytics and Knowledge. And he is currently, I believe, the editor on JLA, so he needs to update and add that to his profile. He's also on a number of additional editorial boards as well. But again, you can find all that by looking online. I'll comment more personally. Vitomir has been, I think, a fantastic colleague and an outstanding researcher and thinker in the field. I've seen him mentor, guide, and develop students who are new in the field and move them from being somewhat novices in terms of Bambi-like knowledge structures to developing into really successful and effective researchers. If you look at some of the publication outputs from PhD students he's supervised, that probably says all you need to know in that regard. One of the things Vita's been working on is something that I think is humbly the biggest unsolved problem in the educational technology landscape. And that's, how do we profile our students? How do we develop a model of what they know, a graph, whatever term you want to use to describe it? And so he'll talk to us today on what I really think is absolutely world-leading research and the framing of a conversation that, mark my words, we'll still be talking about a decade in the future. And beyond that, I think Vita's also a terrific person, great to work with, brings a lot of humor to the people he connects with. So Vita, over to you.
Thanks, George, and thanks a lot for this wonderful introduction. And welcome everybody to the session on using AI and learning analytics to support adoption of learning profiles at scale. So briefly, you see my screen? All good?
Yes, I see it.
Yeah, so just a quick outline of the today's session. So I'm going to talk briefly about the learner profiles, what they are, why do we need them, why now, and why do we care about those things. And then first of all, then how we can use AI and learning analytics to support some of the work in learner profile that's been happening around the world. And then, of course, the challenges and opportunities in this space. What is that we can help as more educational technology oriented researchers, and some of the prospects for the future. So just briefly about, I come from the Center for the Change and Complexity in Learning from University of South Australia. And really the center is dedicated to understanding complexities of learning with digital technologies, AI, and really the broader impact on society. So big themes in our research are learning analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, but in a very applied manner, applied to educational problems. George mentioned, I'm just going to briefly, a senior lecturer and co-editor in chief of the Journal of Learning Analytics. And my work is really, last year or last 2 years, really focusing on how we can support teachers' decision-making. So that's something that I find very fascinating, because analytics originally and all of these educational technologies really were mostly used in higher education. And then as we are moving more, they're being adopted more broadly, we see the really big need in secondary space. Now, what's really happening is that we are really seeing a big evolution and revolution in educational landscape for the last 20 to 30 years, and really driven by technologies. It's not just in education, of course, it's in the broader society, but heavily impacting education. And so, for example, this has been one of the photos I found from a classroom in the late 70s. So, most of you have been in similar classrooms when you were kids, right? So, as children in the room, paper, pencil, those sorts of things. 20 years later, and university setting pretty much looks the same, right? Not much has changed. Obviously, these are even different environments. These are higher education students, again, but it looks very, very much the same. And then, fast forward to last 10 or 20 years, and the classroom looks absolutely radically different. And to, even more than that, we don't have a classroom. I mean, at least for the last 2 years, depending on what part of the world you live in, we had a big, for many, this was the classroom, right? And that's a big difference. And everything comes down really from all of the different changes that we see really stem from this big technological change. And there are all other things that really come from that. So job mobility. We don't have any more, lifelong employment. Like you finish college, you get a job, and you're set in for life. Typically, people stay only a few years at every job they go. It's far more mobile, and the jobs themselves are changing all the time. What we are really teaching students today, we're teaching them for jobs that don't have names anymore, right? They don't exist. So especially now with AI all over, there will be all kinds of new jobs that we can even imagine they will be in their lifetime. And because of that, we really see a massive push for lifelong learning and upskilling. That's not really an option anymore. It's not that I want to promote myself or get a better paid job or whatever, and then I want to upskill myself. No, it's going to be mandatory wherever you do. And then with that as well come a really rise in alternative educational providers. We've seen MOOCs, different, lynda.com or all kinds of different providers, Khan Academy, even free resources like YouTube and other places. We see a different ways of getting education. It's not anymore limited to a couple of institutions. And what we really also see is that the goal is to starting to provide students with the knowledge they need for their workplace, really trying to focus on the skills for workplace. And that can mean also very generalized skills and also some of the very, concrete, they're in demand. At the same time, there are broader societal needs. We see the push for more increasing social mobility, and education is a big factor of that, and probably the main factor driving upwards social mobility. And with that comes also expanded access to higher education, and allowing people who don't fit the traditional profile of university, a 19-year-old college student to access higher education. That leads then to more flexible and personalized modalities. We need to be tailoring to students who have to juggle with family commitments, with full-time jobs and whatnot. Also, we see the push to those skills that employers want, and they are really those generalizable skills that recently I talked to a colleague from business school says there's literally not a single day that we didn't talk with some of the partners to mention that want students who have those general capabilities and skills to be able to succeed in their environment. And also we see a push to accountability of the institutions. So governments and other regulatory bodies were pushing for institutions to demonstrate how students attain certain skills. So whether that's been through maybe even standardized tests or different kinds of mechanisms for accreditation, documentation, and things like that to show us how your students are achieving what you're saying that they should achieve. And with that comes this a push to work and leverage value of technologies. And these were some of the estimates that on average by 2040, in Australian context, there will be need for spending about 3 hours per week on continuous professional development, and that the big push in the future will be not just any kind of knowledge, but the one that complements these new technologies such as artificial intelligence. So we want to focused, provide students with the skills and competencies that will complement things rather than compete with AI, because as you can imagine, that will be pretty much a losing game at that point. And the role of teachers as well will be changing. So, and this is from UNESCO, even 3 years ago report, and that we really are not sure what will be the role of the teacher in the future. We really need to see what artificial intelligence will be doing, but probably we're not going to replace teachers. That seems very far-fetched, but their role will be changing. And these are just some of the things that are coming. And what we can see from all of this is really that there's a growing complexity, right? We have all kinds of different flexible modalities, different kinds of students, different kinds of technologies need to demonstrate things, all kinds of different things. And in all of that, we're trying to figure out, okay, with all of this growing complexity, how to ensure that the students are well prepared for the future and how to personalize their learning. We know that one size does not fit all, right? We cannot have a single approach that will work for all students with all the their all different needs, backgrounds, aspirations, and so on. As well, how to capture their learning progressions. We want to be able, as that comes very in hand with the demonstrating attainment of certain skills. We need to measure and to be able to show how the students are attaining those skills. And focusing only on grades and plotting GPA over time, that won't cut it. I mean, that's not really the goal here. And like a big question is how we can support teachers with this growing complexity. And that's what I'm interested personally in, how we can support them, because this thing is blowing out of proportion in complexity. And in many ways, because of all of this growing complexity, and limited funds that being poured into education, unfortunately, people are turning towards technology, right? And there's all kinds of different technologies being used to help and supplement teachers in their jobs. And there are some really benefits there. We can collect data much more systematically. Teachers were doing that in the notebooks and have their teaching notes and whatnot. Technology can do that much better, much more organized way. We can use all of this information to personalize, finally to do something about personalization of learning and detect weaknesses and places where we can intervene and help students. However, there's a big, word of caution there. Those inclusion of technology needs to be very much pedagogically informed. Technology for technology's sake is a common pitfall. We want to have, we need AI. Yeah, our school uses AI. If that's the goal, to just promote that your school is using artificial intelligence, that's not going to work. So, and as one of my favorite comics of all time, Dilbert, the same thing, right? In this case, his boss wants the database. He doesn't have a clue what the database is. And eventually Dilbert asks him, what color the database do you want? He says, yeah, well, like me, this has the most RAM. Well, that's what we don't want, right? To have a principal of school saying, I need personalized learning, and personalized learning, I want that because I want to, do something. That's not really the case. You really need to know why you're using technology. And all comes down, really, all of these things come down to personalization, to really adjust to student knowledge, needs, motivation, whatever that might be. And over the time, we've seen many different ways to personalize, approaches and attempts to personalize learning. And learner profiles are really, in my opinion, nothing more than the current hot topic in this area. That's the whole goal of them, is to be able to somehow personalize learning and somehow, help students, achieve better outcomes. However, there's one big difference, though, that the profiles have a bit more longer-term outlook than, let's say, using an intelligent tutoring system, which are fantastic, but they're very much focused on a specific skill or a specific set of skills. And they have their goal isn't really to try to be something that you carry over for a long time. So what are the profiles? As I mentioned, in my opinion, a really latest approach to personalization. And it can include all kinds of things, right? All the things we can personalize upon. So it can be including student level of knowledge, certain skills, competencies and capabilities. Even it can include beliefs, attitudes of students, other non-cognitive outcomes, if how they're called these days, such as well-being. A critical outcome, especially for primary and secondary age students, their motivation, their prior knowledge, of course, very trivially to include basic demographics as well, student attendance in class, even standardized test scores depending on the jurisdiction where you are, and also some of the measures of student behavior. How much effort they're putting, how frequently they are accessing materials. When they do that, do they study every day? Do they study, just 2 days before the exam and so on? And once we have the profile, there too, I mentioned really, in my opinion, is personalization, and that really falls down to this developmental side, that we want to try really to use profiles to develop students and help them in their learning. However, because it has this longer-term outlook, it can also serve as evidence of achievement. So it can be something that you carry on with you, almost as the same way you would have a transcript, or can be part of the transcript as well, if you want. Could be almost a record of what do you know, whether you're going to bring that to your employer and show this is my level of knowledge, or you're going to use that for, let's say, admission into tertiary institutions or something like that. Now, the big part of, I mentioned all of these different kinds of things that are in the profile. In most, many of these things are very easy to add, and like, for example, the basic demographics and student attendance. That data is available somewhere in certain database. You can just include that. That's not a really big deal. The big push today is about competencies and capabilities. They are the real, I would say, the heart of the approach towards learner profiling. So they focus on those competencies, or sometimes called capabilities, or even graduate attributes, graduate qualities. Those things are very similar in a way. There is, of course, some difference, but in a way, competency itself is a combination of somebody's knowledge of something, some understanding of certain thing, ability to demonstrate, and ability to do certain things, and attitudes towards something. So let's say being a competent driver would mean that you have certain basic knowledge of, how the fuel works, how the car moves, and what certain pieces are, how they interact. Also having the ability, skill to actually, physically manipulate the vehicle, ability to, look around you, to interact in the space. And also there is a certain attitude as a driver. To be a competent driver, you need to have a certain attitude, right? To be able to understand that you're not the only one in the traffic, how you're going to interact with others and so on. But those three things really what is making somebody, a competent driver, for example. Now, in Australia, there is something called Australian curriculum, which is a thing that's pretty much the definition of what students in the first 10 years of their schooling were supposed to learn. And there are a certain set of general capabilities they call. And if you see, there's 7 of them. 2 are literacy and numeracy, and then there is all the other. And one of them is information communication technology capability, critical and creative thinking, personal and social capability, ethical behavior, and intercultural understanding. And that's where you see, for example, this, 3 things coming together: attitudes, knowledge, and skills. For example, ethical behavior, it's really not so much about, demonstrable skill, but more about your attitude and your beliefs and your knowledge and understanding of certain things, right? So they all have a different mixture. Something is more of a skill, less than of an attitude, and so on. Another very popular learner profile, and that's actually called learner profile, is International Baccalaureate learner profile. Within that profile, they define 10 different traits, if you want, what they want from students in their program, to have. They want them to be inquirers, knowledgeable, thinkers, communicators, and so on. We at University of South Australia, we have a similar thing. In fact, pretty much most of universities in the world, we have something called graduate qualities, which pretty much look like this. They're slightly different. For example, we want our students to be able to be lifelong learners and the other one is we want them to be effective professionals in their own practice and so on. And those are all kind of different things that go into profiles where the focus is really on different competencies. Now, what are some of the challenges with this competency-based profile, if you want? Well, first of all, I split it out into four main challenges. First, about the definitions. How do we define those competencies? The next, how do we measure them? Then how we're going to teach for the competency development. Even if we have all of these different fine measures, how are we going to develop those competencies in students? And then finally, how are we going to adopt them in the practice? Because teaching is, it's not just theoretical thing. There's also a practice of teaching and the whole inner workings of the school systems. How are we going to adopt them into practice? And that's important, how we're going to introduce them, how we're going to collect the relevant data that's needed for implementation of profile, how we're going to measure the effectiveness of all of these things, because is it really helping students, at the end? So when it comes to the first one is defining competencies. So first thing that really should be the goal is to focus on the theoretically validated construct, right? Something that we know from research. And that's where researchers and universities have their own contribution there to help development of the profiles that is based on the well-founded constructs. And that's important because eventually what we want to have is to create some shared understanding about this construct. So if we have a certain phrase such as, critical thinking, we want everybody to have roughly similar interpretation of that term, because eventually we would want people to assess student learning for that. And it's very important to have this common understanding. And the thing is to avoid mixing different things. So I've showed you the Australian curriculum. I personally don't like how some of these things are phrased because, for example, one of them is called critical and creative thinking. In my opinion, those are quite radically different. I'm not an educational psychologist, but as far as I understand, they're quite opposite thing almost. Critical thinking is very rational, convergent, analytical, logical. You're critically assessing certain set of evidence, certain information, and whatnot. Whereas creative thinking is almost all the opposite, right? It's very intuitive, divergent in nature, right? The idea is to generate new things. Also very speculative. You're coming up with ideas. You don't know how good they are, and so on. So it's those two things are quite different. So now, if you're going to merge them into a single construct called, critical and creative thinking, well, what if the student is good in one thing and not the other? For example, I'll be much better in critical thinking than creative thinking. So what will be my score there? And let's say I'm eventually bring my profile to applying for an art school, and I might get away and get in based on my critical thinking skills rather than my creative thinking. That's for sure. So that's something, right? There's the difference between those two things, and avoiding doing some things like that. Comes out with the other capabilities. I'm really focusing on the thing that I know mostly about, so in the Australian context, but these things I've seen all over the place. For example, the personal and social capability as one of the competency. It consists this is the model proposed by CARA, the body governing the Australian curriculum, consists of these four things: self-management, self-awareness, social management, and social awareness. Those are different things, right? And they're quite radically different. Like something like self-management is one thing. Social awareness is a completely different thing. So if we're going to lump all of these things together, that might be a challenge. Now, what can AI analytics do in this space? Well, not much, right? It's up to us to define the constructs carefully. it's up to us as humans in this whole process to define them carefully, and that way we can ensure shared understanding of things. However, by preparing this talk, I was thinking this part mostly about this part, and we can do some of other things. Can we get AI to do some of this is more speculative now thinking. Can we get AI to do some of the dirty job for us? Like what can we have? For example, we could have, if we have all of the different constructs, if we cannot agree on a specific set of contracts, we will have one school system, say an Australian curriculum would use certain set of competencies. In Germany, they will use another set of competencies and so on. Now, let's say we have a student from Germany applying in Australia to get to university. Well, his mapping won't be, it will be hard to assess if he comes only with a number for critical thinking, whereas our university said, if you want to go to this program, you need to have critical and creative thinking to a certain level. It will be something that's hard to match. Can we get AI to figure out all of this from the data, right? We have all of the different program information, curricular data, and so on. Can we get AI to do this dirty job of mapping things and figure out, oh yeah, these things are kind of similar. You can use this as a substitute for that to help us this process. And almost something like fixing your photo collection. I don't know about you, but I gave up. My digital photos are a mess, and I'm never going to fix that. There's over 50 gigabytes of family photos, never ever going to fix that. There are duplicates, there's a mess. I really hope AI will come with, I will probably will look at mostly those photos when I'm, when I retire from my work. So by then I'll be able hopefully to say, show me the photos of my daughter's birthday. And AI will finally, hopefully be able to figure out where in this whole mess of the photos that they are. Because I'll never be able to, they're just piling up more and more photos, and it will be a more and more mess. So can we use AI as the way pretty much now Google Photos is able to do that, to figure out what is on the photo and help you deal with this mess of reality? Can we get AI to help us with that, to allow us to support incompatible measures of competencies? Because it's very hard to agree on the definite list of competencies. In fact, even if we agree on that, 10 years from now, they won't be the same. You might agree there is let's say we're going to talk about, let's say driving car. One of the things would be, managing one of the skills, probably all of the list of different skills about car driving will be operating the shift stick. Well, if we are going to be driving self-driving cars, shift stick is no longer a competency. It's a useless thing, right? We don't need that anymore. So this whole definition of knowledge is updating as the time goes by, and especially that's going to be something very, very, important in the future. Now, when it comes to measuring all of these different competencies that go into learner profiles, there are really two common approaches, and they're very similar. First is teacher professional judgment, right? We come to teachers and ask them to judge and assess students' attainment of certain competence. The other way is to really ask students to reflect on their learning activity, reflect on the process, and then they provide the judgment of what do you think your ethical, how much, where on the ethical behavior scale you sit. And you can, of course, combine these two. And how we're going to do that most of the time, we rely on rubrics. And rubrics have, they look pretty much like this on the screen. They have three things really to them. They have certain dimensions, certain nicely defined level of progression, and certain performance standards, certain behavior that we want to expect of student at a specific level. So dimensions are the different subcomponents. For example, one of that would be, in this case, shown the effective reasoning, and there are four things that consist effective reasoning. Then there are four different levels when it comes to effective reasoning, from novice to basic to proficient to advanced. And often, I mean, of course, we know it's a continuum. And then we as practitioners, we have to pick up, is it 3 levels, 4 levels, 50 levels, how many? And of course, we know it's not so bucketed. There is always a progression, but we have to draw a line somewhere. And then really the bulk of the whole table is the specific performance standards. So when it comes to novice learners, what they do when it comes to validity of the claim, which is one of the items, and so forth. So that's really how they look like. And of course, to develop them, it's a pretty complicated thing, because that's a really time-consuming process to develop these things effectively. That's why they don't come easy. How are we going to use these rubrics? Well, we can do that assessment at predefined time points. Let's say every 3 months or every 1 month or whatever, we're going to do that. Provide assessment of student, their capabilities. And then populate that somewhere in certain system and then visualize that as a form of a profile. We can also do this subject-specific assessment with assessment rubrics. So we will, for example, let's say ethical behavior, we're going to have that as one of the rubric items in a specific assessment activities, and then we can do that. The challenge there is you need to have to be able to judge somebody's ethical behavior from a specific assessment piece, right? That it needs to be designed in a way to be able to say anything about it. And of course, there is an idea of continuously assessing somebody's competencies as you notice certain demonstration of a competency, that somehow you can collect that data as well. Again, all of these things are really in the development at the moment, so it's unclear, and it's how different organizations are doing that. Now, in either way, what it really measuring competencies require is to ability to recognize when something is demonstrated. So if one of the competencies is in your intercultural understanding, you need to be able to detect from interactions with the student when he demonstrated that. So you need to be almost like, as a teacher, attuned to those things. And as we heard from a panel earlier today, this is not the easy thing. It doesn't come natural right away. So you need to almost be trained in ability to detect those things. Also require in-depth understanding of these rubrics. These rubrics are not trivial. They're quite complicated, almost research instruments in their own way, and definitely not something you can just sit down and use 5 minutes later. They really require in-depth understanding of them. But even if you've done all of that, the big problem, and that's my biggest concern, is really that they're very time-consuming and they require high cognitive load. So if I'm a teacher and I need to assess somebody's critical and creative thinking, I need to think about several weeks or days or months, whatever, interaction with that student, and think about all of the different things when he maybe exhibited critical thinking. Well, he asked a question in the class, but he also then stepped in this discussion. When we had a group discussion, he did this and so on. And then once you're done with the one student, now just completely shift to another student. It's very high load to do something like that. Those assessments, these are complicated constructs that we are talking about, and we want to pretty much do a very holistic assessment of them. It's very, it's not easy. And that's, as you might expect, what we can do with AI and analytics. We can have, first of all, there is a great opportunity to automate rubrics. So at least some of components of rubrics that we could automate. And they're, for example, using text analytics. And there is a bunch of work over the last 20 years done in that space. Analysis of student sentiment, analysis of creativity as it's expressed in text, analysis of critical thinking, how it's expressed in text, and so on. So assuming that you have a certain activity where students produce a piece of text, whether it's a formative or summative assessment, doesn't really matter. But if you have a certain thing where students are producing piece of text, where in a way that requires them to be creative and be critical in their thinking, then you can use text analytics to automate those sorts of things. Also, social network analysis. We talk about social capability and social awareness. How much interconnected the student is to the other students. We have the data of, extracurricular activities. We could have certain, wearables and things like that. We can connect and realize how students are connected through this data. Of course, there is behavior analysis, how much students are using learning resources, when and why. So we can talk about self-management, for example, could be one of these competencies, in Australian curriculum where we can really use this data to help us with that. And of course, self-regulation, that's really the foundation for learning analytics. And not surprisingly, this has been done a few years ago, actually, 6 years ago. And there've been a special issue in the Journal of Learning Analytics. Sorry for really this shameless plug, but in the Journal of Learning Analytics, we had Learning Analytics for 21st Century Competencies, pretty much on this topic of how we can use analytics to measure these competencies. And I urge you to take a look. There have been a bunch of articles there. So I will just give you one example as well. The other things we can do. So not just to extract the measures in this way, but there's also do more sophisticated approaches and to combine the data about the programs, courses, and all of the things that exist in a curriculum. So as most of the degree programs, they consist of courses. Courses have their assessment components, right? Whatever they are, doesn't really matter. And we have that the assessments are mapped to a specific competency. That's how at least is in Australia. Universities are required to have that information. So, for example, recently there'd been a TUNISA accreditation a few years ago, actually, for Australian teaching standards. There have been a need to demonstrate how we teach students these 7 standards. Standards come in 3 flavors, if you want. There's 2 standards about professional knowledge, 3 standards about professional practice, and 2 standards about professional engagement. So this is what pretty much every university in Australia is required to show to the government, how we are developing these 7 standards, where we assess them, where we teach them, and so on. So I'm just going to show you a subset for the first 4 standards. So we have a bunch of courses and assessment components. So course 1018 in education, it continuous assessment, is really assessing the standard 2, knowing the content and how to teach it. And the same one for all the others. So we can see, for example, that the first course, 1018, has 3 assessment components. 2 of them are really about the standard 2. 1 is about the standard 3. And then on the other hand, we can look at how many, and typically this is what we care about. We say, well, how about standard, let's say standard 4? Well, we have these 3. These are the 3 assessments that are about that. Doesn't need to be just about it. If you can see, for example, unit of work, that one is about standard 3 and 4. Doesn't really matter. It is about, at least partially, about standard 4. So then what we can do is build item response theory models that will show us how much, if these 3 things are the items assessing something, right, the skill that these 3 are supposed to capture, how good are they doing that? So then we can see for here, x-axis is the ability, student ability, and y is the probability of achieving that. So if you look at the last to the right box, we can see that the blue line, students who got F, the failing grade, most of them, the high probability, almost 100%, they're going to be very low on this standard number 4. As we are increasing their grades, we are seeing that they are more probable to be in a higher knowledge of this skill, of this standard number 4. Pretty much the same thing we see for the box in the middle, right? We see that the review, this assessment piece called review in the same course, really does pretty much the same thing, right? We see that that the grade bands very much aligned to this skill, right? And then look at this one, the 1102 play plan. This is all, by the way, from primary teaching degree. We see this one. Look how all over the place this one is. So that means that you're achieving high on that assessment component doesn't really mean you're going to be good when it comes to this particular teaching standard. So this thing, when we were evaluating the quality of program, we can say, yeah, actually play plan isn't really a good measure of teaching standard number 4. It's not really aligned to it. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It might be a great assessment, knowledge-based assessment, right? Assessing something else, how much students know a specific subject domain. That's a different story. But if we're going to say that the play plan is assessing teaching standard 4, that's not really the case here. It's not really well achieving that. Now, if we run this all for all the different standards and all of that, what we can do, another cool thing that we can come up with is the profiles of students, in a sense, the common achievement profiles, if you want. So we see one group of students who are really good in standard 1 and 4, and if they're going to struggle about something, they're going to struggle with standards 2 and 3. That's where their weaknesses is. Then we have a second group, which is basically students who are high achievers. They ace everything. And yes, you can expect they're really good in all 4 standards. So not much. Unfortunately, that's the smallest group. And then we have the third group of students who are pretty much poorly achieving all 4 standards, but especially standards 2 and 4. They're really bad with that. Now we can see that, and if we are having this kind of assessment, this is great. We can help those students along the way. So if we get assessment after first year, taking the items from the first year courses, we assess this and say, okay, you need to do some more work in this area, on that area, or whatnot. Again, the goal to personalize learning, to provide assessment, to help them improve their knowledge and reach higher standard. Now, how do we teach? And we had this and today at the panel. How do we teach for competency development? This is all fine. Even if we have the best measures, rubrics, or teachers who know the rubrics perfectly, how are we going to do that? How are we going to teach? And a couple of approaches where we see from the working with other schools. First of all, have certain activities that are really almost an add-on to the existing curricular activities. So let's say a school wants to run a week-long program to assess leadership. And during that week, students will be exposed to a bunch of different learning activities, and there will be either teachers or somebody coming externally who is very skilled in assessing leadership competencies, and they will do that. Or whether it's a creativity competency or whatever, that's something you can do. Or maybe have a certain extracurricular clubs and places like that, where that's where you're going to look at the attainment of these competencies. Then another approach is, how about we look at to identify existing teaching activities and what they achieve. So this is what I was showing you before, this really competency mapping. We will say, okay, in this assignment, I'm really not developing all of them, I'm just developing a couple of them, and then use that as a source of to see where we are teaching what. And then the most integrated but most challenging one is to really redesign almost from ground up all of the different learning activities and teaching activities. So then we integrate a specific competency development into courses. Now, if we do that, the problem, we need to have a way of feeding back the data back to teachers so they can use this data to improve. So if we're gonna, let's say, redesign a course that it measures critical and creative thinking, well, then the whole point would be to put the data back to the teacher. So if the student isn't developing critical thinking in a desired way, then we can do something about that. When it comes to AI and analytics, what we can do, and that's a really, really great place, and probably we're going to see them heavily used in the future, is provide opportunities to demonstrate those competencies. Often the problem is being able to demonstrate, to have those authentic activities, they really allow you to do that. Well, there is a bunch of, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, gamified environments, those very immersive and integrated environments, they allow you to do that. So, I don't know, you're learning a language and there's a language learning class and student interacts with some VR game and talking to AI agent, you're learning French, it's happening in Paris and the student is walking the streets of Paris and learning about the culture, learning about different things. So that's where you can see how much he's showing the understanding of different culture pretty much, much more easily than if you didn't have that kind of technology. And in that sense, we have recently been working on a project called AI Playground, which really tries to do that, right? To build this playground environment where students will be able to demonstrate their critical and creative thinking. So what they do here, students are developing Mars rover. So they're using bricks to develop certain rover, and then they are using through help of AI and eventually able to simulate how the rover will be behaving on the surface of Mars. And then the idea is students will be learning how to, different changes to the design of the rover, how that impacts, behavior. And then you can see the creativity in designing the rover, for example. And these are some of the components. So students are working with a certain vision tracking system. They are developing through different components. They can ask AI for help. Hey, where did this piece go? Where that piece go? And helping you build. So here you see a very small prototype, but you can have a rover with 300, 400 pieces. Then you can ask AI, what can I do with this? Well, where this pit fits, and so on. And eventually you launch it on the surface of Mars, obviously virtually. So because that'll be pretty expensive to do, really. And yeah. So now I just want to briefly go over from working on all of these things with schools, what we noticed as being involved in schools, whether it's a playground or the other activities. Schools are collecting all of this bunch of data, right? We have all of this different data, but they're really much poorly organized all over the place. And they are typically in independent silos in different platforms, different places, and schools are really not using this data. So there is no really a way for them to longitudinally look into data and see how they can be used for improving student development. While the profiles can help us there, is really to allow us to development to fix the feedback loop, because typically the feedback loop is pretty weak. We really want to use the profile data to improve this feedback loop, to allow teachers to have a data that can help them inform the teaching and provide students better feedback. So in our current collaboration, I'm just showing you a brief, like a screenshot of the data. We have the profile developed for helping teachers decision making, and we focus on all from reception, which is a pre-primary school level, to year 12, and what we really focus is on learning, not accreditation, not as an evidence. So not as an evidence of teaching, because in that of evidence of learning, because in that case we really need to have whether it's a valid construct or not. The focus here is let's collect all of this data into one form of a profile and then allow teachers to use this data to support their decision making. And originally, the goal is to support disadvantaged students, their progressions, and identify intervention opportunities. And here, integration of the data is really essential. We want to focus on teachers rather than administrators, because most of the dashboards that have been developed, very similar dashboards, focus on supporting principals or regional leaders or from the department, people from department and so on. And eventually we can support them by aggregating, but the real point is to have a student level data, then the teacher can look at and use it to start discussion and collaborate, start a dialogue with the student about their progress and their achievement. And Now, the question is, what about students, right? Can we use these profiles? How they can be tailored to student needs, right? Can we use them, students' aspirations, to drive intervention? Not just all of this so far has been coming from a teacher angle. Like teachers given certain data, teacher has a profile of the student, and teacher is able to do something about it, right? In an ideal world, once we have it. But there's students have a say there as well. And can we look to identify gaps by students? Earlier today, Hassan Makavi from Salesboard mentioned the idea isn't that the profile should be maxed out, because they are different skills. So the best would be to have high achieving on everything, but that's not really the goal. If that's what you're going to do, you're just going to put more and more strain on students. So can we combine this with the demands from employers? And I will just show you briefly one system from University of Technology in Sydney that kind of goes into that way. So students are able to put their study plan and certain what they want to achieve, and this is what you picked. These are your mandatory courses, these are elective, and this is what you want to do. These are the skills you're going to be developed. And if you're able to pick this or that, these are the specific skills that you're going to be developing as well. So imagine something like this, where we will be able to have students customize what they want to learn given their end goal, what is their dream job, what they want to do, and then use that to drive interventions and drive the development of the profile. So for me, who is hopeless when it comes to artistic expression, focusing me on developing above level 1 would be pretty much waste of time. But then somebody else who has a desire for to be an artist, then for them intervention should be totally different. We don't want to push everybody to max out all of the capabilities. That's not really the goal. At UniSA, we also did some of the analysis of job descriptions. So imagine this being linked to analysis of job ads. So as a student, you pick a certain program. I would like to be a programmer. Okay, these are the set of skills you really need to develop. These are the courses that will help you. But if you develop these additional skills as a data analyst and blah, blah, and these, you can then have far better reach on the job market. Rather than just being a programmer, you can be also a data analyst or data programmer and blah, blah, and other things, right? So now we're feeding the data from the job market into helping students make a decision how their profile eventually should look like. And that's something where really we will be pretty much seeing development in the future. And so just to summarize, we're kind of getting close to the full hour. What we really have to do here is include teachers early in these things, because if we are not including them in the design of this system, then it becomes a big problem. And the experience of other organizations dealing with, such as Salesboard and others, they are really trying to include teachers very early in the project, because that otherwise you're just going to pile them up with the massive rubrics and massive systems they don't trust, they don't know how to use, and not going to end well. Just providing the data isn't enough. Obviously, you need to be able to make certain inferences from that data and understand what the data actually does. We all have a bunch of dashboards, but nobody knows how to use them because we don't understand really what's happening in the background. As mentioned before, one size fit does not work in this case. The one profile that you might develop for certain schools or certain countries pretty much won't work in other places. There's also all of the different cultural considerations to be taken into the account, and that's why it needs to be some way of some adjustment of these profiles, whether that's going to be through the different learning activities or maybe even through the construct themselves. So you might have as discussed earlier today, maybe to have 10 different constructs, but the profile will be a specific subset of those when the student wants to focus on. Critical, and that's from really what we were working with schools, is build on existing project, because what we are doing when we come with the systems like this, we're really disrupting somebody's work environment. And they don't like that. Nobody likes to be disrupted. And if you're building up on something there anyways was supposed to do anyway, that we're helping them, right? So we're not we just come, hey, we developed this new dashboard and we expect you to log in and see the student profile, once a week. And yeah, they're not going to like that. But if they were doing something already, that will be, much better and, better chance of success. This was mentioned today by Tony Sims from Henley High School. Just start. Just try to do something. And then eventually over time, you're going to see what's going to be ended up in a student profile. With working with them, for example, we first focused on these early easy wins, adding the data that's easy for them to help them some decision making. Now we are trying to get the competencies in. And for adding competencies in there, will, of course, requires, picking up the construct, doing all of those work that, discussed earlier. Importantly, bigger, broader awareness across staff that something like this is coming, because this is a big change the way we teach, probably the biggest change in the way we were teaching any subject, really. Look at, 1910. Mathematics is pretty much taught the same way in primary school, and it was taught, 100 years later. You have a certain set of knowledge, and this is how you teach it. That not much change, right? It was still pen and pen, pencil and pen for more than 100 years, right? Now we are changing that. We're gonna focus on that, but also on a certain set of capabilities on top of that. When it comes to adoption in any system, really, it's more about people than technology. We can develop all of the different profiles and all of different rubrics, but if the people don't see a value in them, that's not going to fly. And as mentioned earlier, focus on those early wins before you ask people to do some big change to their job. So by focusing on some smaller and easy to reach data and adding those into the profiles, then it will be much easier to get people to change their assessment or ask somebody to redesign their whole course for adding more data. And I guess that's, so just to summarize, like the construct and mapping, how we're going to define them, how we're going to, deal with incompatible models, how we're going to do, the focus on the development and learning of students, ensuring that the competencies can be demonstrated and eventually effectively adopted. And thank you very much. So.
Well, thanks very much, Vita. We're right at the wire, and I think others will need to go to other sessions. So as Tim noted in the comments, this is the sort of concept that everyone should be able to see, or a lot of people should see the core ideas. And as I noted before we started, I think this remains one of the most critically unsolved challenges in education, because everything we talk about, future models, connections to the labor market, as you noted on a few occasions, ways of alternative assessments and evaluation, flexible, adaptive pedagogical models, personalization, different models of schooling, stackable degrees. There's one common linchpin that hangs in the entire process, or that pulls the whole system together. And that's some way of creating a persistent and a sustained profile of the learner, what she knows, how she's come to know it, how, the metacognitive strategies and related dynamics. So I think you've done an outstanding job detailing it. So one way to look at it is, Tim Berners-Lee, his original paper around the World Wide Web, the idea that it was a read-write space was pretty simple. It's easy to read. Since then, it's launched tens of thousands of detailed articles on how to actually do it practically. And so I think what you're addressing here, Vita, is you're sort of articulating that this is the idea, the technical dynamics, the models you have to build, the nuances, different school sets. That's going to launch hundreds, if not thousands, of papers over time to try and address that. But we need to start with a conceptualization. I think you've done an outstanding job laying that out today. So thank you very much, Vita. Everyone else, I know we've got other sessions to go to. Thank you. You can jump into the next room and carry the conversation on in the discussion forum in Huba if you would like. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.